For the third session of covering Equitable Community Development Day 3, I think that by this point we can all agree that a critical element of reporting on community development is storytelling. And no matter what the topic, no matter how much data is involved, no matter how complex or lengthy the research surrounding a topic is, what really matters are the stories that emerge from these findings and how we communicate them to the public. And so this session is going to help us amplify that issue of health equity through people's voices and through their stories by helping us identify the local heroes in our communities. As I've been saying over the past few days, I want you all to go back to your communities with a fresh eye and think about all of the issues that we've talked about and see if you can find people and organizations who exemplify them. So to help us with this process today, we're joined by Nora Mabie. Nora covers Indigenous communities for 5 Lee Enterprise newspapers in Montana: the Billings Gazette, the Missoulian, the Helena Independent Record, Montana Standard, and Raleigh Republic. She's won grants from the Annenberg Center for Health Journalism and from the American Press Institute to support long-term projects on health equity and voter engagement in tribal communities. And she also, which I found really interesting, regularly crafts and circulates engagement tools, including surveys, social media call-outs, and polls as her way of reaching diverse sources. So I'm hoping you'll share some of those details with us as well, because we could replicate them in our communities. And we are joined by Tescha Hawley. Tescha is the founder of the Day Eagle Hope Project and the volunteer executive director for the organization. It was founded due to her own personal journey of navigating life with a breast cancer diagnosis. Tescha works at Fort Belknap's Tribal Health Program. And last but most definitely not least, Tescha drove 7 hours to come and be with us. Tescha and her mother, I should say, came here to be with us. And if that's not enough, she was named a 2023 CNN hero for her work with the Day Eagle Hope Project. So let's welcome both Nora and Tescha to this session. Nora, I'm going to let you take it away. You've done a presentation, and so I'm going to step aside and let you have it.
Do I click?
Oh, here's the clicker.
Oh, thank you. I'll just sit down. Okay, great. Yes, hi, I'm Nora, and yeah, like Rachel was saying, I've been covering Indigenous communities in Montana for 5 years, and I'm not Native, so I was going to talk to you guys about kind of covering communities that you don't necessarily belong to. Can you guys hear me okay, or is this working? Okay. So for this project that I'm going to talk to you guys about, which was on health equity, it all started from this report in 2013 in Montana, which said that Native Americans in this state died 20 years earlier than their white counterparts. And after this 2013 report kind of blew up here, it inspired the governor at the time to create like tribal positions in our health department and really try to focus on this and find solutions. And so I hadn't heard much since. And so I started this project in 2023, and it was 10 years later, and I was thinking, okay, so what's happened? Are we still seeing this kind of horrible disparity? And I started out by talking to tribal health experts. Before I even did my reporting, I just sort of asked for advice because I wanted to make this a really thoughtful and big project. And everybody was telling me, don't just write about disparities. And we're tired of hearing disparities. It's too much. That's all we hear about in the news. And that feedback was familiar to me because when I started this job, when I met with tribal leaders, a lot of people said, you know, the news focuses too much on powwows and crime. Like, we want differences. We don't want all this negative talk. So when I got this feedback, I was nervous at first because, you know, I understand where it's coming from and I understand that it's important. At the same time, the 20-year gap is also really important. We don't want we can't have communities dying, a generation earlier than others in this state. And so I wanted to do this thoughtfully and knew that it was still an important story to tell, but maybe I could tell it in a different way. So what I ended up doing was just kind of leaning way into community feedback so that this wasn't just me kind of coming in and extracting information and telling stories that these communities already knew, but rather like really using the community to sort of drive which direction this went so that it was more of like a partnership. So what I ended up doing, and actually I'm just gonna pass these around, I'm gonna get to this later, but this was sort of the final product, and this is like a print series that our papers don't deliver to the reservations, so we made this so we could deliver it free. And then this is just like a call out, which I'll get to later, but you guys, since it might take a little bit to get around. So what I ended up doing was holding some listening sessions, and so in this photo is from one of them. I went to the Crow Reservation and convened Crow tribal health leaders, tribal council members, and Indian Health Service leaders into one room, and we talked about what can be done to improve health outcomes and what are they already doing, what do they think could be better, what do they want other tribes to know. And this was I was really afraid of doing this because I thought people wouldn't show up. And it actually went really well. And what ended up happening is it started out kind of like me interviewing a group, but then it ended up more like people talking to each other across agencies, which was really good. And then at the end, people sort of told me they appreciated having the chance to communicate like across agencies in ways that they hadn't been able to before. And then another thing I did was a couple like different surveys, both online and printed. And the card that I'm passing around is sort of like a postcard that I distributed at a bunch of tribal communities, and it has like a QR code to my survey, just because I wanted to really expand my reach of who I'm getting to and reach a diversity of sources and regular people with regular experiences. And then the last thing I made sure of, which was feedback I got from a lot of people, is just keep a solutions focus. What are people already doing in their communities, like Tescha, and what do they need? Because Tescha is like the expert in her own community. So I think sort of a comment I got is like oftentimes journalists will come in and like think they discovered this problem and think they know, what are the solutions? And really, Tescha, lives and works in this every day, so she knows. So highlighting people like her is important. So this is the survey that I distributed, which that little call-out thing links to, and I learned kind of an interesting lesson from this. So initially, when I had this survey up, and I distributed this on Facebook and in our newspaper, newsletter, and physically dropping off copies, and then that QR code. And initially, my whole goal with the survey was to reach people in their communities who had lost a loved one too soon in a death they viewed as preventable, because I wanted that like human part of this story. And the way I had initially phrased the headline of it was, have you lost a loved one too soon in a death you viewed as preventable? And basically, I ended up getting tons of comments and responses from people who said, my daughter died at 20 in a car accident, my son was killed in his 20s, or so-and-so died of an overdose in their 20s. And while those responses ended up being like part of my story, just these kind of more violent and accidental deaths, it wasn't really what I was looking for, because what I was looking for was people's interactions and experiences with healthcare systems and accessing healthcare. And so I was just sort of thinking, like, why am I not reaching, like, what is going on with this question that I posed? And then I was working with a grant, and my mentor through the grant suggested we rephrase it to, is your family's average life expectancy under 65? And I felt like that was a really bad idea, because I felt like it's too scientific, it's weird, it's long. anyway, it worked. And I ended up getting tons of responses from people who were like, my father has diabetes, he had to travel X amount of hours to do this. I have to do this. I had to move my family to access treatment. And what I realized in the phrasing, when I had phrased it as, did your loved one die too soon? If you're living in a community where the average age of death is in their 60s, too soon will be 20. So that was like my own, as an outsider covering communities I'm not a part of, that was like my own bias interfering. So it's good to try new things and just be receptive. Like if you use community tools, to just like look at the feedback you're getting and see if like maybe it's just your language that's the issue. So then in my series, we have 7 reservations here, and I visited 3 for 3 stories, and produced this, which I'm passing around, and it's just sort of we kind of got like a special print edition so that I could distribute it to every reservation in Montana for free, just so that, again, it's like an effort of, this isn't just journalism about Indigenous communities, but it's also for them, and this is meant to be like a helpful tool and resource. And so what I ended up finding was that, now white Montanans live on average till 78, and Native Americans in Montana on average die 17 years sooner at 61. So it's really not much better at all from 10 years earlier. And a really important data point that I found was that rural white Montanans also on average die at 78, because a big piece of feedback I always get when I write about tribes and access issues is, well, that's the same like for rural Montanans, and Montana is rural. But this, the data clearly shows that there's something unique about being Native American in this state. It's not just rurality, there's other factors to healthcare. So it ended up being 3 different stories. The first one was about barriers to care. And this woman on the end is Ursula. And she lived on the Crow Reservation but had to move about 100 miles with her family to Billings so that she could live, so she could get cancer treatment. And it was just a lot about, she has young grandchildren, she had to switch schools, all this just to get the care. And then up here is this woman, Frances. This was a story about what does it look like and feel like to live and work in a community where too many people are dying too young when they shouldn't be. And then here's Tescha, who in the third story focused really on solutions. Tescha is someone in her community. And she'll speak to this. This is the page of Tescha's story. But Tescha is like a powerhouse, dedicating her life to improving health outcomes. And so I was so excited. Basically for this story, I followed Tescha for like 2.5 days. Very nice of her to let me. And just watching her, like distributing food to people, visiting with people who are getting treatment, walking them through it, taking people to doctor's appointments. Tescha, this was a story following people who are, someone who's doing the work, but also like, it's an example of, this isn't necessarily a scalable solution, because Tescha, you also ran into barriers with your own resource limitations and things like that. So it highlighted kind of like, I kept asking you all the time, like, what do you need? Because I was sort of hoping, like, Tescha, for example, needed a better car. It's actually, sometimes I wanted to show in this story that sometimes the solutions that are needed are big, like we do, Indian Health Service is failing agency, but that's a big systemic problem. But there's also like smaller things like get Tescha a car. That's pretty easy for if people wanted to help. So anyway, I'll let you take it from here. And I just sort of have photos, and then they have the video if you want them to play that.
Oh, we'll play that at the end.
Okay. So I just sort of have you just describe. Yeah.
I feel like I'm in restriction sitting here, and I'm more of a stand-up person, but welcome to the great state of Montana. This is our homeland. I'm an enrolled tribal member of the Fort Belknap Indian community. I'm an enrolled Ani White Clay person. But first and foremost, I'm a mom. I have 2 children. And just for a correction and record, I no longer work for Tribal Health. I'm a therapist. We're contractors in our Harlem schools for mental health. Where is my lady from St. Louis? I went to school, graduate school at WashU, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to connect to her because this little res girl went all the way to St. Louis to graduate school, and I was so scared, and it was really a cultural difference. So I can imagine how you guys feel trying to reach out to Native communities, because I felt the same, just reversed. I got my master's in social work from Washington University, spent 2 years there, and then went on about my career. And then I thought, I'm going to get out of social work. So I thought I was going to be a CEO of a hospital. So I went and got my master's in health administration. And I'm so far removed from that right now. Like, that's not even in the radar anymore. But back in 2017, I don't know, the years just rolled by. I grew up thinking that my career, my education was my way out of my community of poverty and all of the social ills that we all know about. Then I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And please don't judge me, because I always thought cancer was in Caucasian white men. And I thought I would never get that. And boy, was I surprised. Cancer is not in my family. There's no history of breast cancer in my family. Then it was then that I had a life-changing experience. I was in between jobs. At that time, I'd worked for land buyback for the Office of Special Trustee, went to 48 tribes in the United States and met a lot of beautiful people through that. But I was sitting at my table in between jobs because my job had ended, and I literally took the last $250 out of my checking account, sat at my computer, and started Day Eagle Hope Project. And so Day Eagle Hope is named after my daughter, who is an Enrolled Chippewa Cree tribal member. Her name now is Day Eagle Woman. She's become a woman. So I named my nonprofit after her for longevity and advocacy for our women, not only our women, but just people in Indian country. As I was navigating, I'm like, right, I have a master's degree. I should be able to talk their language, right? But man, I heard nothing of what any of the doctors were saying to me. Not at all. And I took my whole family, because we're very family oriented. I took my 3 aunts, my husband, my best friend, who is a nurse, to the first appointment with me in Billings, which happens to be 3.5 hours away from where I live. I struggled because I couldn't hear what they were saying. One, I didn't know what to ask, and I didn't know how to ask, and I didn't know who to ask. And I take pride in my education and my lifelong experiences. Like, I could get this right, but I was getting nothing. I didn't know how to navigate the system. I didn't know what questions to ask, when to ask, who would help me. When I got home, who would help me if I got sick in the night, literally. And because all that we could ask is somebody at the ER, right? So we get a lot of these nurses that come in and out, traveling nurses, not from our communities, not from our state. And I struggled with that. And I often thought to myself, how are our elders going to communicate? How is this elderly male going to talk to somebody about prostate or colon cancer? Because those are so intimate, and in our culture, we're so protected of that type of information. And that's when I thought, this is when Day Eagle started, that there is a need for us to bridge that gap of communication and just simple communication. Not long after I was diagnosed, my stepbrother kept going to the ER in Fort Belknap. IHS, and I don't mean to speak ill of them, and I try to be guarded with how I say these things, but sometimes I have to say them and be blunt about them. Rather than treating chronic long-term pain, somebody that needs a knee replacement, a simple knee replacement, they will prescribe you the opiates. And we all know what opiates do. They get you hooked. You go on for long-term without treating the problem, right? And so then a problem becomes a problem, and then somehow you're discriminated against that. So he kept going there, complaining of a back problem, kept going to the ER. They kept sending him home. It was a repeated cycle. And then they flagged him as a opiate seeker. And the whole time he had stage 4 colon cancer. And he ended up passing probably 3 months after the diagnosis. And so he had to finally get referred out 3 hours away to the Billings clinic, and then, you know, was brought home. But even when he was down there, he was so quiet, private, reserved, couldn't ask the questions like, what's going to happen next? What's my next treatment? What are my options? And so they just, you know, and they were calling me from the doctor's office, and I was trying to help them, you know, navigate the system, like get your pathology report, because the pathology report will tell you in plain terms where the cancer is at, what the scientific terms are that you could somewhat, like, you know, interpret, right? Some of us can do that. So those are some of the barriers. I had gone through my travels. I was like, heard this radio station in Billings, which is 3.5 hours from where I live. It was a breast cancer center, and they're like, do you have pain? And I'm like, yeah, I have pain. And so I'm like diagnosing myself right through this. And so I call them up and I'm like, I think I need to be seen. And they're like, do you feel a lump? And I'm like, yeah, I feel a lump. We're sorry, we can't see you. You have to be seen by a physician, your home physician, and then referred. And I'm like, well, great, because I don't have a physician, because all the physicians are, you never get the same physician in Indian healthcare. So I'm like, how am I going to maneuver this? So the equipment that was at our local IHS office, the mammogram system, the machine was there, but guess what? It was outdated. And so then I had to go, and I'm going to try to go through my life story fast, but hitting the disparities. I was referred to Northern Montana Hospital because we don't have specialized care there. And I went there, and I'm like, okay, you know, I know human behavior. I'm a social worker, done this my whole career. And they kept taking image after image after image, and I'm like, this is not right. And so then they're like, wait, hold on a minute. We need to take you back. And of course I was exposed. And they're like, wait a minute. And I'm like, what are you doing? And they're like, and I'll remember this to the day I die, we have to call IHS to get permission to do this for payment. And so what they were doing, they had already known at that time that I had a lump in my breast. And I knew too, but, you know, and they took like 7 biopsies, but they told me, oh, we're only going to take 5. And I'm like, at the 6th one, I'm like, you only said you're taking 5. And at the 7th one, I'm like, okay, you said you were only taking 5. But at that time, they knew, because then they brought in another radiologist. And I knew at that time that, you know, that I had breast cancer. And so from there, I was feeling really frustrated, disgusted with the system. Like, treat me as a human, and just because I'm getting payment from IHS, why do you have to stop in the middle of a procedure and go ask for payment? I still can't understand that, you know? So I went through that, and then we got on to purchase referred care, which is at IHS. In order to be seen further, you have to go through this process again of being approved within the system to be seen by a specialist. And I was on my way to my first appointment in Billings, and the purchase referred care individual is another tribal member who had personal issues with me, called and stopped and said, you're not approved for purchase referred care because of your residency. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, the government works remote. I've been remote for the last 4 years with my job. And so I had to work through that. That's just some of the things that we have to deal with when you're an advocate in your community. You become targeted. But I've worked through all that. It's been a struggle. Those are some of the barriers that I talk about. And then most recently, before I came here, I didn't get to talk to Nora, but I'm also working with Catherine through the U of M journalism here, who's also talking about purchase referred care and unpaid bills. So long story short, well, before I came here, I got a letter from one of the medical facilities demanding payment. If I didn't pay it, they're turning me into the credit bureau. Prior to this, my daughter was born with a cleft palate. I had my son, And all of our medical bills have to go through IHS, through Purchase Referred Care. Well, the bills didn't get covered for the birth of my son and some other medical, some for my daughter. I ended up in the credit bureau. And in the process, I was applying to buy for a house. Well, guess what? I couldn't purchase my house because I had outstanding debt in Purchase Referred Care. And as you all know, credit determines everything, your whole livelihood. I don't know how we figured this out, and I don't even know why we have it, but it stopped. It delayed the process for me to purchase a home because I had to clear up my back collections in healthcare. So now I have to go home tomorrow and figure out this other debt that's looming. But the treatments lasted, my chemo was over a year. I had to go to Billings back and forth with the chemo treatments. And I had to do 60 rounds of radiation, which I had to leave my family. My daughter was still in school. My son was still in school. Thank goodness I had a best friend that lived there, and she was a nurse, and I was able to live with her in her home. But I was away from my kids for 6-7 weeks for radiation. And, it's the barriers of the distance. We were having to travel. It literally, here in Montana, we get 50 below wind chill factors, and it's very isolated on the road that we have to travel from and to. Thank goodness I had my family to help me with that, but a lot of families don't. And some of the families that I've worked with, one individual lady that we helped get to her appointment, she had a flat tire, couldn't call anybody, and she's just like, well, I'll just miss my chemo. I'm like, you can't miss your chemo. And so that's when we physically helped her, transport her. Through our nonprofit organization, it has evolved so much since I started it. But I'm at the first and forefront is advocacy and advocating for healthcare, and especially with behavioral health services as well within our community. When I worked for the tribal health, our tribe, sadly, we are #1 in the nation for suicides. And 2-3 years ago, we had a suicide epidemic. We were burying people, all young males, addicted and sexual assaults. And so those are the things that we don't talk about in our community. But I always say I'm not a victim of my circumstances. I grew up with a single parent. My mom was a single parent. I became a single parent, and I always say I'm not a victim of my circumstances. I understand that we have to understand and recognize historical trauma, but that doesn't define who we are today. I live in a very vibrant community. We are very vicious with each other, but when it comes down to it, we all come together, and we help and support each other. One of our cancer survivors, she didn't have a washer and dryer in our community. I had it. All I did was post it on social media, and I had it within 10 minutes. And those are just some of, and those resources came within our community. I always say I don't have a handout, but I have a hand up. And I recognize that in order to get these much needed resources, you need capital and you need money. So we've been doing that. This is Mr. Moore. Him and I have been working together for beginning of time for about 20 years. He's our cultural specialist. He is diabetic. He's a recovering alcoholic. He's been sober for 30 years. He has our Buffalo Bundle, which is one of our ceremonies. He's able to perform that. But right now, sadly, he is on. I can't. Please forgive me. It's the dialysis that you do at home, because he would have to travel, and our tribal members do have to travel 3.5 to 4 hours to dialysis. How they do it, I couldn't do it. They're up at 4 o'clock in the morning. They're driving to Billings. They're driving to Great Falls for dialysis because we don't have a dialysis center. But Buster is able. However, we had a huge windstorm the other night and knocked out the electricity. And guess what? He couldn't do his dialysis that night because he didn't have electricity. And so I'm like, we need to work on a generator for you. So now we're trying to figure that out. So, you can back up. This is one we, through the partnerships, right? Because we can't do this work alone. Through our partnerships, we're able to distribute 25,000 pounds of food out into our communities. And our communities are spread out. We have 4 of them with a 100-mile radius. And so we have volunteers that come and help us and distribute these food boxes. And so these 2 trucks I paid for their gas and their community tribal programs, but also tribal employees, but also volunteers that help with me to get the food out into our communities. And before this, keep in mind, I did not get into this business of food. Like, that was the farthest thing on my mind. And I'm like, man, I should have paid attention in social work. Like, Maslow hierarchy of needs is food, right? Basic food, need, shelter. And guess what? Where I'm at is at the beginning. And so that's kind of where we're at. This is my office. It's a mess. I'm a mess.
You work like 5 jobs.
I work 5 jobs. Don't judge with the chaos. But you back up. That silver beanbag, I can't tell you how much therapy and that does for our kids. So our kids come in the school, and they're able to just decompress, get their thoughts together, and be still. And I just hold space for them because that's what they need. And so that's my day job. After my day job, then I do drive school bus because, yeah, you're gonna think I'm crazy. Because our communities are so small and our needs are so great. Like, I didn't tell our school I had a CDL for 2 years because I knew they were gonna work me to death. And I'm like, just use me as a last resort, but I become the last resort every day almost. So, because if we can't get our kids to school, then how are they gonna learn, and how are they gonna have access to food and access to resources and mental health and just that socialization? So that's why I do it. So that's part of me. And I just want to tell you briefly where we're at with our nonprofit organization. So we've evolved from healthcare into, I'm also an equine EGALA certified therapist. So I'm working my academic world with my cultural world and joining those two. And it's challenging at times, but we're making it work, and we're integrating both because, right, we have to. Sadly, because these are how services are paid and reimbursed. We're not being paid for any of these services, but eventually down the road we will. But at the same time, we're integrating our culture with mainstream healthcare. So we have equine therapy, and then we also I established a food pantry through COVID, our tribe completely shut down. They weren't allowing people in, they weren't allowing people out. And so it was through that. I started with literally nothing. I have an old cop car that our tribe donated to me, and I purchased it in a shipping unit, a shipping container, and that's what I stored my food in. And through COVID, myself and my children, right, because they're my free labor. No, I'm kidding. My family has helped me tremendously with my nonprofit. We went out and delivered over 1,500 meals door to door in our communities through the food bank and the food purchasing. So we've established a food bank, a food pantry out in one of our outlying communities, and then a food pantry in our high school to help students and youth. So right now, I just recently wrote a $2 million grant on behalf of our tribe through USDA, and we're buying local, fresh produce because, right, like cancer, so many diabetes, obesity is a lack of access of adequate food. And we're in a food store, we're in a food desert, so it's really hard. But when I was in St. Louis, man, I'd go down to the market every weekend, buy my fresh fruits and vegetables. But, we're doing that now. And you'll see in the video, our tribe owns about 2,500 head of buffalo. And so we've since processed about 25 of those buffalo. But keep in mind, because of USDA regulations, we have to go with a USDA plant. So we have to get a mobile unit with my great friends from Warrior Meats out of Ashland. They're another nonprofit organization. They drive 9 hours with their mobile truck. We get our buffalo out of the field, we process them, they take them back. But a barrier to that is they're about 9 hours from us, and trying to transport 5,000 pounds of buffalo in 90-degree heat, it almost didn't happen. 1, because we're so rural. 2, I couldn't get a refrigerated truck. So I'm like, okay, what do I do now? And thank goodness my nephew owns a semi. I rented a reefer, and we were able to get the the buffalo back transported. But even for us, those are the barriers, because food, and also I hope to market the bone broth, because from the bison, the bone broth helps with the nausea, and someday I'm going to market that and make millions. Maybe that's how I'm going to live. But that, just going back to our traditional cultural values and beliefs, and food is what is how we're changing our society and helping with the health disparities. So I could talk forever, but I just wanted to show you this video. I was nominated as a CNN hero. If you know CNN, they receive thousands, hundreds of thousands of nominations a year. And then I made it to the top 10 CNN, and I'm a top 10 hero. And from there, we went to New York, and we had this big old gala. And that's when I really found out about journalists. And CNN, man, they followed me around for a week, and I was like, when are they going home? Because it was so intense. It was so crazy. They're so, they were back. I'm like, what are you doing at night? Like, it's time to go to bed. And they were back there editing the stuff we had shot that day. Everything had to be in pristine order. And I'm like, you're stressing me out. And I told them that, and they laughed. Because they were they brought so much fire and energy just because of journalists and CNN. And they were having to get things right? So the guy that came from California left the drone, so he had to stop in Billings and buy a new drone, had to get it approved FFA, and now I have a drone in my name through CNN. But it was there through journalism that I really, truly understood journalism and what they're doing and how they're getting these stories. So they were part of a ceremony, and that was a game changer for them as professions, and I'm glad that they were and part of that ceremony is on here. And I'm glad they were able to experience that, because it's that human-to-human relationship. So you could play the video. As American Indian people, we represent the highest of everything: diabetes, heart disease, cancer, and we receive the poorest health care. Our reservation is about 30 miles from the Canadian border in north central Montana. There's essentially two different tribes, the Gros-Ventre tribe and the Assiniboine tribe. I am an enrolled Gros-Ventre member. You're probably about a good 3 hours to major hospitals. My journey started with my breast cancer diagnosis. I get a phone call to tell me that you've been diagnosed with breast cancer. And the only thing that I could think of was, am I gonna die? I just stayed up all night in complete shock, not knowing what's gonna happen. I have a master's degree in social work and a master's in health administration, and I'm also a licensed clinical therapist. I thought, I'm smart, I should be able to navigate this, but I wasn't. I didn't know what to ask, who to ask, or how to ask. I made my whole family come with me to the appointment because I knew I was not going to hear one word they said. I had 4 hard rounds of chemo and 60 rounds of radiation. I was a single parent. The cost of hotel, food, and gas is huge, but I did have some support. There's a lot of people who don't have that. The majority of our people are living in poverty. In our community, we have a lot of people that won't ask for help, and they'll just sit in silence and sadly suffer. I had just finished my last chemo treatment, and that's when Day Equal Hope project was started. Hi, Julie. Hi. Cancer affects your mental health. It affects your spiritual well-being. It affects your entire family.
Okay, we're on our way.
We know the need is huge for transportation, and we know some people can make it to their appointments on their own, but some need that emotional support and connection.
Equipment operator.
Really?
Yeah. I've been going to Billings every 21 days for infusions. The trip takes us at least 3 hours. We leave on Sunday, spend the night, and then go for my labs.
Go ahead and get your port accessed first.
Okay. Then see the doctor
Potassium's a little bit low today.
and go do my infusion. The round trip is like 400 miles, sometimes even longer if the roads are bad, especially if there's ice and snow. The wind chill can be 40 or 50 below. I've been fortunate to have people who support me, like Tescha's program. Thank you, see you.
If I didn't physically transport them, I would help them with gas cards and gift cards so they could buy food, a hotel, or gas.
Our community should be very proud because you're lifting up a lot of spirits.
I went to my tribe just to introduce my nonprofit to them. And our tribe gifted me a retired hop car.
So that would be another 8 boxes.
Oh, we could do that.
All right.
So it started out as breast cancer, and I was so focused on patient navigation and not really paying attention to what our culture is. If we could eat healthy, it will reduce our risk of cancer. That's when I started getting into the nutrition of it. We live in a food desert. It's not uncommon for 3 and 4 families to be residing in one dwelling. How many kids do you have? 12. She has 12 grandchildren she's raising. We have so many grandparents raising grandchildren, generations of families living in one household unit. Can you handle that?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi! We have done distributions of fresh fruits and vegetables, fresh eggs. Hey, I know you guys have a lot, so is that enough? We're able to harvest organic, grass-fed beef that were grown locally and give it back into our community. Are you guys good? Yeah. Okay, see you guys.
Thank you.
Through COVID, my little cop car delivered close to 1,600 meals door to door. In our language, the Itanan is our buffalo. It's the provider of all things for our people. From the beginning of creation, the buffalo has always provided for our people, whether it was for food or for clothing, everything we utilized, but most importantly, it fed our people.
It's good to see you all again. With this pipe ceremony, we're going to ask that buffalo for its life. We've been doing this since Creator paired us up with the buffalo.
Our ancestors prayed that our buffalo would sustain us. And that's exactly what's happening today with our nonprofit work. We joined in a collaboration with our tribe to help harvest our buffalo and give back to our community. Everything that we do is done in a cultural, respectful way. We invited the community to come and pray to our Itanan for good things for our people and to take away from the bad and the negative and the struggles that our people faced. So the warriors are all United States Marines who have served our country and are given that right to harvest our buffalo.
We're moving.
With the 7 buffalo that were harvested, we will gain about 5,000 pounds of lean meat that is fresh, it's organic. And the bone broth will help our cancer survivors dealing with the nausea. One of the struggles is the need is so great for so many things. Sexual abuse is rampant in a lot of our communities, and it's that darkest secret that we never talk about. And I'm so vocal about it. We have a lot of people that are unhealed from that, who end up in addiction. We deal with crisis and chemical addiction, and we provided horse therapy to around 45 youth. Culturally, horses provide us with a lot of mental health therapy because it's all about connecting to your mind and their spirit. There's a lot of discussion about lateral oppression, historical trauma, and for me, it's important to understand that, but I'm not going to allow it to define me and not allow it to defeat me. I don't want to be defined as a victim of my circumstances. This is our food pantry. Many times I wanted to give up. The barriers, the hurdles. We had a great day. Our buffalo hunt was pretty incredible.
I want to thank you for showing us leadership and courage.
Your grandma Tootsie is very proud of you.
And then I get that sign that this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Hey there, how are you? And that's what drives me every day. That's how I'm able to get up in the mornings and put both of my feet on the ground. We don't have a lot of money, we don't have a lot of resources, but we make things happen with what we have.
Thank you.
I always have to remind myself I'm not here to fix everybody's problem or even a problem, but I'm here to help. Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks, Renee. Prior to my diagnosis of cancer, I thought my life was based on my professional career and my education. I love you too. And it wasn't until after my diagnosis that I suddenly realized that none of that mattered. Hi! I still strongly believe education is our key out of poverty. But now I know that this is my calling. Like, you can't plan this stuff, right? So they were in the car with me and we're talking about the disparities in our community, and you'll see two young gentlemen and they just appeared in front of us and it was so weird. But they were passing their alcohol back to each other and they captured it in that moment. And I'm like, is this supposed to be happening? But Julie Kalbeck, who is also in the video with me, sadly her cancer has come back. She too has to drive for 3.5-4 hours, spend the night to get the treatments that she also needs. So since then, our food distribution, right, because this all comes back to access and resources in our community. Our local tribal commodity program, which is our food distribution, they got shut down because they had black mold, electrical issues, and structural damage in their building, and so they've had to move out to our community hall. But what I could say about, as journalists, getting into communities, one is patience and time. And as Indigenous people, things happen when they're supposed to happen. And some of that I was talking to our CNN journalist, because I felt like we were such on a time stringent, and I'm like, you're just gonna have to sit here and wait. Because when we were out doing our ceremony, that took time, right? It happened at the right moments, and I wish I could go into some more detail about that with our ceremony, but I had 7 Marines that were in combat come and help us harvest our buffalo. But prior to that, we had our ceremony, and then the rains came. But maybe in your time you could do more research. But the water and the rains was a true blessing, because that came at the end. And like spirituality, you really don't believe it until you experience it, and that was one of those times. And so it was pretty powerful. It was a beautiful ceremony, and as journalists, I just getting into communities. I'm not even sure how Nora found me, but anyway.
Why don't you tell us, Nora?
Yeah, how did you find me?
I found you, so when I was working at the Great Falls Tribune,
Yeah.
it was a different paper and I was just getting started covering tribes, And since I'm white and also from Chicago, I just had a lot of work to do to gain trust here. So I had gotten advice from people saying, like, we're tired of crime and powwows, and also whenever women are covered, it's for missing and murdered Indigenous, it's when they're missing or murdered. And they were like, we need more success. So I started a series called Outstanding Indigenous Women, where I just did like profiles to gain trust of people. And I asked people for nominations, like, who do you want me to feature? And I had this spreadsheet, and somebody nominated you, and I was just working through this spreadsheet because it was a great way for me to like earn trust, because I could then reach back out to the person who nominated you. And I was like, hey, here's the story, thanks for the suggestion. But then it also put me in touch with amazing people in each community like Tescha. So I had done that feature of you. So I knew what you did. And then when I was working on this life expectancy thing, I knew that was your passion. And so that, I think that helped maybe you trust me to follow you. But I don't know. Yeah. So, but I had known you, and it was just helpful. But also, like, I don't know, I'm curious about your experience, because I followed you and CNN also followed you. Like, were there things that you wished journalists had done differently, or that you didn't like, or when other people reach out to you that you don't like, that we can all sort of learn from?
I would say that if you're going into an Indigenous community, is first to really make an attempt to understand the history. You know, when they were created, how are they created? Because our tribe is Indian Reorganization Act tribe, and so we follow the modern day constitution, which is so systemic and doesn't work. No wonder why it's not working in our Indian communities. It didn't work here, right, in our countries. But is to understand, and I have to be guarded with what I say. Necessarily the political leaders probably are not the people you want to talk to. It's people like me who are doing the grassroots stuff. Our boots are on the ground. We don't fear what the leadership or the politics says about the passion that we're doing. So the people that are doing the work, they're coming with compassion and they're coming with passion, and that's where the true stories lie. We have another. It just started with a lady in our community, and it's elders helping elders. And I'm not sure how she took up this initiative, but she probably saw a gap, right, and wanted to help. And so she started that, and she has been able to get some of our tribal resources to provide the services that they should have been providing to begin with. And so she's a voice in our community. So she would be one that I would go to. So and just be really understanding of time and patience. And it takes time to establish rapport and trust with people that you're working with. You know, my experience with CNN was a little different because I knew what was coming, right? And so, and they had done some prior background information and things like that. I could just tell you a little experience that just happened to me recently. We had an outside organization like, hey, we need to come into your community to do listening sessions. And I'm like, oh, great. They understand my community. They know I feed 500 people. They know a whole bunch of people are going to come. They're going to be prepared. And keep in mind, I'm trying to manage 1,000 emails because since my CNN thing, I've had people like, hey, I don't know what they're doing. What are they doing? Like, I have to be really guarded with that because I don't want people exploiting our people because of the exposure that I have exposed our community to. And so I have to be really guarded with that. And so I'm like flipping through these and I'm like, I didn't read the fine print where they only wanted 10 people. And I'm like, how are you going to get an effective survey or whatever listening session? You want advocacy in our state to change policy, but you only want 10 people in our community. Now I'm like processing this. And and they only brought a little meat and cheese tray that they must have got at Walmart and a 6-pack of water. And I'm like, I was in horror and I'm like, my community trusts me and they're going to be like, what in the heck are you doing? Like, we eat. And so I was running around our food pantry and got more food. And then I just got pushed back from there. But here's also the kicker too, right? They advertised they were going to give $75 gift cards for people to come. And I'm like, now it's like, Tescha, we went through our emails. We kept telling you it was only 10. And I'm like, you know, I'm not going to take responsibility of this. This is how our community is. I apologize, but I won't be doing work with you in the future. And so it was their meeting. They were asking questions, but I had to step in, interpret the questions, if you understand that. But they kept like asking each individual, and I'm like, oh God, at that point I was like cringing. I'm like, our people are so introverted to an extent, not wanting to voice their concerns in only a few. And so that was a learning experience for me as well. Just going into communities and understanding how communities, and that goes for all communities, not just Indigenous communities. You know, communities have a way of operating. They have a hierarchy of the people that they go through, leaders in their communities and things like that. So I don't know what else to.
Let's see if there are any questions at this point. Oh, wait for the mic.
Oh.
My name's Polly Dinetclaw. I am from the Navajo Nation. I'm originally from Gallup, New Mexico. I guess one of the things that I am very curious about is because for me personally, like I don't encourage and I don't tell people that it's okay for them to be a part of ceremonies. Because I don't think it's our place as journalists to be documenting that, and that if a community wants that documented, then they should, like, their people should be doing that. And so I'm curious about how, like, why you thought it was important and how it felt and how your community felt about that ceremony being shared publicly.
So not all of the segments of the ceremony was shared through CNN. They were told to not video. But they only, after you watch it, you'll see we introduce it because that was the way, that's how we do things, is through ceremony. And that it wasn't anything that was planned. It's just, it was another part of how every buffalo hunt that we do, we start with a ceremony. And it was just part of what we done. It was greatly received by our elders, by our veterans. Some of the veterans that were in Fallujah did not want to be videoed, and they weren't videoed. And so part of that ceremony was videoed, but certain parts of it weren't because they weren't allowed to do it. So, and not only that, is educating our people in our community, in our world, that we are still connected to our spirituality, and through our ceremony and the respect of our buffalo, and that's how we are healing our people. And so those 7 Marines, that was also a healing ceremony for them because they had all served in combat. And that's their way of giving back to the community, and they were fine with that. Mm-hmm. And our tribe fully supported it. And so everything that we do is based on spirituality and moving forward and how we go about this. Everything.
Any other questions?
Hi, I'm Federica from Univision News Digital. Thank you, first of all. I was thinking what you talked about, the violent feeling of them interrupting the procedure to go check the payment. And we heard the other day from a doctor also talking about the importance of empathy. So I really wanted to hear from you, how extended do you think, how important have you seen it is for members of your community, empathy, cultural competency, linguistic barriers in terms of health equity and, you know, treating people from underserved communities?
How I felt while I was going through that procedure?
And how you see it among other people aside from yourself, if you've heard the fact that, you know, how important, if it's important for them also, the fact of greater need for empathy.
There's a huge greater need for empathy, and if you watch the CNN Hero thing, I always stand by, be kind to one another, because I don't know what Nora's going through, because you don't know when that next step is going to be off the cliff. And for the empathy and it's so important. Our healthcare system is overworked. COVID put everybody over the edge, doctors, healthcare providers, everyone. And my advocacy for this patient navigation is so important, because patient navigation will help the doctors understand the other person on the other side of the room, right? Because doctors are black and white. Most of them are. They're scientific based. But there's also just that human capacity to be caring and compassionate. All races, all walks of life, all professions. It's huge. I'm not going to lie, I'm still pissed off at IHS, because is it about payment? Or is it about compassion and caring? Let's worry about the payment later.
Thank you. My name is Nina Joss. I'm with Colorado Community Media in the Denver area. And I had a question for Nora. For this project, there was a project I was part of recently in my newsroom that was an anniversary of a very significant tragedy in my community. And I wanted to do a similar type of community engagement to basically let the community totally lead our coverage, because it had been covered so much and in very painful ways. And I didn't pitch it very well. So in defense of my editors, I could have pitched it better, but I had some pushback that was basically the energy of well, what if what they say doesn't agree with what we want? And what if they have opinions that aren't within our editorial standards? So I'm curious, that frustrated me, and we ended up working out a compromise. But I'm curious if you had any resistance, if there were any moments where the advice you got went against what your editors wanted, and how you defended yourself and worked that out to still represent the community well. Because I think that's the most important thing, but our editors are our bosses, so it's hard sometimes.
Yeah, it's really hard. I've had that happen to me before where, it's kind of just community reporting isn't always going to fit the news model we have. And when I first started, and I was trying to build trust in these communities, what I started to do was, I was saying, a bunch of features of people, because I just wanted to get trust. And I would go to the communities and I would just meet with people, and I'd say what has my paper done wrong? What would you like to see? What stories would you like to see in the news? How could I be better? And if they gave me a story idea, I would just do it, and the story ideas would often be stuff that my editors wouldn't think is newsy. So it would be one of our teachers just got a super local award, but that's really important too. And it's actually, what's frustrating to me is I think my editors didn't see that as newsy, but then at the same time, I was working at the Great Falls Tribune, and we would cover if a teacher in Great Falls got an award, but it's about extending that. And we'd cover, for example, the first day of school in Great Falls every year. And then do we cover the first day of school on a tribal community? No. So I started to do that, but there was pushback of well, how is this newsy? But then it's almost but we do this all the time. And it's all, and eventually I got editors who trusted me, and I think they just were aware that they did not know much about Indian country, and luckily. But I do think sometimes it's so painful to push back on these things. I even had an editor one time when the Pope, some Canada tribes had him wear a headdress, which was controversial, but my editor was why don't you just do a story on headdresses in tribes? And I'm I'm not doing that. I was it's so I think there's these difficult things where you have to push back, and I don't know, sometimes I've even had an editor sort of say to me I'm seeing the land back written on graffiti everywhere, and they're can you do a story on land back? And I'm okay, if I see something happening, or if I hear a community talking about this, I'm not just gonna I think it's a problem when we just because he just discovered land back, like, I don't know why that would be newsy. And so it's almost like, I think it's so important to get the news from the community, like people telling me, like, this is what I want to see. And now that I have had that trust, people will reach out and be like, more like difficult stories that I wouldn't have gotten. Like, my tribal government is having issues. That's a story that I wouldn't have been trusted with before, because it does, like, you know, it's something that you wouldn't want to be covered insensitively. So anyway, I think it's hard, and I'm definitely familiar with it. And I think, I don't know, I think it's like tough conversations with editors about, like, we need to let the community lead. And this is, what I say to them all the time is, like, this is a trust building. This is trust building. So
this is an incredibly, I just wanted to say that this whole issue of trust building is so important, because, you know, we've heard over the past few days, one journalist in particular talked about his editor not understanding that redlining still exists. And so these sorts of realities in newsroom situations require us to dig deep for those stories, to be able to bring the evidence to our editors to say, this is what's really going on. And you may not know it, you may not be comfortable with the topic, but this is the reality. So I know that many of the journalists in this room are going to want to stay in touch with you, particularly for your strategies about engagement. But I want to say about Tescha Hawley, something that I say about all the people that I've worked with in the past 5 or 6 years who are community activists, advocates, people like her. You're doing God's work. I mean, I don't know if you're all religious or not, or whatever higher entity you believe in. You are doing the work in communities that would not get done otherwise. And to that end, I can promise you there are 10 people in each of your communities like her. And I say that because most of the time when I meet people like Tescha, they are so committed to the work that they don't want their name in media. They don't want to tell their stories. They don't feel comfortable. They feel like it's not about me, it's about the work, it's about the people that I serve. So I want you all to, again, go back with that fresh eye to find out who's making maternal health available in your community, who's making sure the kids have food over the summer. Really ask those questions. You're going to find people like Tescha, and you're going to be able to amplify their stories. So I hope this session has been as powerful for you as it was for me, and I want us to take this opportunity now to thank Nora Mabie and Tescha Hawley.